From Photonics Media, this is All Things Photonics, a podcast where we explore industry-shaping advancements in lasers, optics, imaging, metrology, and sensing. Each episode, we'll speak with some of the brightest minds in industry and research about the trends shaping the landscape of photonics.
Today's episode is brought to you by Hamamatsu Corporation, a leading manufacturer of devices for the generation and measurement of infrared, visible, UV light, and X-rays. Hamamatsu is dedicated to the advancement of photonics through extensive research and offers specialized systems for select applications. Visit hamamatsu.com to learn more.
Time travel is not just theoretical, it's proven. But that doesn't mean we are anywhere close to a functioning time machine just yet. Ron Mallett is a physicist and professor emeritus at the University of Connecticut. He has been fascinated with the idea of time travel ever since he was a little boy. A year after his father passed away, he discovered a Classics Illustrated edition of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. That comic sparked the imagination of 10-year-old Mallett, convincing him to pursue a career in science and to learn more about controlling the clocks. Decades later, he believes he has cracked the code on time travel. It just requires lasers and some cosmic intervention. On this episode of All Things Photonics, Mallett shares with us the science behind his theories, what it will take to traverse the past and present, and which Hollywood movies actually got time travel right. Joining me today, we have Professor Ron Mallett, a physicist and professor at the University of Connecticut. Professor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your program.
Yeah, it's certainly a very interesting topic. I know you've been talking to a lot of people about this. And Professor Mallett, before we get into the science and photonics around this topic, I have to ask, what sparked your interest in time travel?
Sure. I'm glad you asked that because it was very personal. I grew up in New York City in the Bronx, and I was the oldest of 4 children. My father was a television repairman, and I adored him. I mean, he just was bigger than life, and he was very, very good at his job. He, in fact, fixed the television set of people like Walter Matthau, who was a big star at one time, and I have a picture of that as proof. The thing is that he looked robust, he looked healthy, and what we didn't know is he had a weak heart. That was a problem. We didn't know. My mother knew it, but we didn't know that. And the thing is that he died of a massive heart attack when he was 33 years old. And it devastated me. I mean, I went from being a happy kid to a very depressed kid. He gave me a lot of gifts, toys like gyroscopes and crystal radio sets, things like that. He also gave me the gift of reading. And fortunately for me, about a year after he passed away, I came across the book that changed my life. It was a Classics Illustrated edition of Time Machine by H.G. Wells. And on the inside cover of it, it said, "Scientific people know very well that time is just a kind of space, and we can move forward and backward in time just as we can in space." The thing is that what I thought was that this means that if I could go back into the past, I could see him again and maybe tell him what was going to happen and save his life. So that became a mission for me. I wanted to go back and see him. And so I thought I have to build a time machine. The thing is, I didn't know how to do it, but I tried to mimic something that was on the cover of the magazine with the old television and radio parts that my mother had kept of his. Nothing happened, of course. But the thing is that I was disappointed, but I wasn't discouraged because it said scientific people know very well. And then that's when the second person came into my life. I should mention that after my father died, we became very, very poor. And I loved to read. So what I would do was use the lunch money that my mother gave us to buy books rather than to eat. And I came, the Salvation Army, I came across a paperback that had a picture of Einstein on the cover of it. And Einstein was standing next to an hourglass. Now, I knew Einstein was this great genius. I didn't know exactly what he did. And as an interesting coincidence, Einstein died in 1955. My father died in that same year. They actually died a month apart from each other. And so it's interesting because my father was still alive when he when it was mentioned in the newspapers. Little did he know that he would be passing away a month later. But in any case, I thought Einstein must have something to do with time because he was standing next to an hourglass on the cover of the book. And in the old physics of Newton, it said that Newton said nothing can change time. Einstein said you could alter time. There were ways you could do that. And I knew if I could understand Einstein and understand how time could be altered, then that might be the trick. So I got the book. It was hard going. I mean, I didn't pick up anything except for the fact that it said that Einstein said you could alter. And so I knew I was going to have to go to college to figure out that. But as I said, we were poor. So I used the GI Bill to go into the Air Force. This was during the Vietnam War period. And I went to Penn State University and majored in physics. And eventually I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in physics, specializing in Einstein's work. And I did learn exactly what the possibilities were of altering time based on Einstein's work. So that was the beginning for me, beginning of my journey of trying to build a time machine. And it's still the thing that motivated me.
That's really interesting, and we know time travel has been the subject of so much science fiction. So in those earlier stages where you're expressing this interest in time travel and you're studying to help better understand it, was that always something you openly shared, or was that something you felt you had to keep to yourself, maybe?
Yeah, that's another very good question because this was in the 50s. Sputnik hadn't even happened. So people weren't even sure we could go into space, let alone travel in time. And so science fiction wasn't as popular back then as it is now. And so I thought I better keep this to myself because people were already worried. I was depressed and people were already worried about me. And I thought if I told them I wanted to build a time machine, that might not be a good idea. So I did keep it to myself. Fortunately for me, as I got older and when I was studying in college, I realized that Einstein had looked at other things. He wasn't focused on time travel. What he was focused on was trying to understand the nature of matter and energy and light. But one of the other things that he concentrated on was an object that's called a black hole. And I'll come back to what black holes are just stars that have collapsed to a point where the light that tries to escape from them can't escape. And so since all the light is being pulled back to them, if you're standing outside, all of a sudden you would just see them wink away and you would just simply see this black spherical hole in space. But what Einstein found was that not only is space affected, but time is affected. So I thought if I could study black holes, then I could study about how time is being altered. And black holes were considered to be a crazy subject, but it was considered legitimate crazy, unlike time travel. So that became my specialty. I used that as my cover story, so to speak. So by studying black holes, I learned about how time could be altered, and that helped me on my journey.
So is that the scientific basis of time travel, or is there more to it than that?
Oh, there's more to it than that. I mean, much, much more to it. Einstein developed two theories. The first theory he developed in 1905, which is called the special theory of relativity. And to put that in a nutshell, what Einstein said is that time is affected by speed. What he meant by that is the fact as a clock moves, the faster a clock moves, the more time slows down. Okay, so time for a moving clock slows down. Now, your heart is a clock. So that would mean that if someone was watching you and you were traveling fast enough, they would see your heart rate slow down, your metabolism slow down. So any clock would be affected by speed. The other thing is that people think when it has to be speeds that are traveling at light speeds. You can't travel at light speeds, number one. This slowing down of time for a moving clock happens literally at any speed. It depends on how fast you're going. The faster you're going, the more the effect occurs. So this is happening even when you're in your car or you're on a passenger jet. It's just that those speeds are so slow compared to the speed of light that you can't even measure the effect. But the closer you get to the speed of light, you can. Now, we have seen this effect on a macroscopic level and on a microscopic level. There's a device at Switzerland called the Large Hadron Collider. This device, what it does is it speeds up subatomic particles and gets them close to the speed of light. Some of these particles only live for a very short period of time and completely disappear. The thing is that the faster you get these particles to move, the more their internal clock slows down. So in the Large Hadron Collider, they can get these particles to live 10, 20, 30 times longer than they normally would by speeding them up close to the speed of light. So we know that these particles, in a sense, are traveling into the future. What do I mean by that? Is the fact that here, since we're traveling at a normal speed, time is going at a certain rate. When these particles are moving, time for them is slowing down. So they're actually traveling further into the future than we are. Now, we actually see this effect even macroscopically. Let's say, in fact, this experiment was done in the 1970s. People aren't aware of it, but what they did was to take two atomic clocks. One was put on an ordinary passenger jet. The other atomic clock was kept at rest at the Naval Observatory. When they flew the passenger jet around the world and brought it back, they found that the clock on the passenger jet had actually slowed down compared to the clock at rest at the Naval Observatory. And as I said, it had to be measured by atomic clocks because the effect was small, but it was measurable. This means that when we have rockets that can go close to the speed of light, we'll see this in a dramatic way. If we have an astronaut who is traveling, for them, maybe a few years will have passed from their standpoint, okay? But from people here on the Earth, time will be marching along at its normal rate. Time will actually be moving faster here for us because we're just going at a normal rate. So when the astronaut comes back, they'll find that for them, only a few years has passed. But for everyone on Earth, decades could have passed. In fact, they could come back and find out if they've had children, that they might come back and find that they're younger than their grandchildren. Now, that sounds very weird, but we actually have seen the baby steps of it in this experiment with passenger jets and with the experiments at the Large Hadron Collider. One of the movies that I tell people about that gets it right is Planet of the Apes, the original version with Charlton Heston. You know, they think that they landed on another planet, but they were just traveling so fast that they had traveled into the Earth's distant future. So that is a real effect. Not the Planet of the Apes, the ape part, but as far as traveling into the Earth's future.
Yeah, hopefully there's no blowing up of the Statue of Liberty or anything like that.
Yeah, I know. That was a dramatic scene. It really was. I still remember I had a date at that time, and she was completely unhappy. She wanted to get up and walk out of the theater at that point. But the thing is but that's time travel into the future. So by using speed, we can slow time down and we can travel to the future. And it's real. I mean, it's not just theoretical. We have been able to do it experimentally. But no matter how fast you go, you can't go back into the past. But once again, it is possible. And once again, it's based on Einstein's theory. Einstein developed a second theory that this was in 1915, 10 years after the special theory of relativity. The second theory is called the general theory of relativity. And to put it simply, Einstein said that time is affected by gravity. So in the special theory of relativity, time is affected by speed. In the general theory of relativity, time is affected by gravity. What did he mean by that? What he meant was that the stronger gravity is, the more time will slow down. So, for example, a clock near the surface of the Earth, where gravity is strong, is actually running slower than a clock at high altitudes. So the further you get away from Earth, the more this effect occurs. Now, this has practical, everyday consequences. People are surprised about that. And what is the consequences? It has to do with the GPS system. The GPS system actually works because of this. I'll tell you why. The way the GPS system works is in your car, your GPS unit has a clock in it. Okay. The satellites that are sending signals to you have clocks in them. The way in which the GPS system works is there's a very simple relationship between time, distance, and speed. If you know any two of those, you can compute the third. So if you know the time the signal was sent from the satellite, and the time it reaches your clock, and you know the speed of the signal, which is the speed of light, you can compute distance. That's how the GPS system works. But when they were first setting it up, they were relying on Newton's theory. And Newton's theory says that time cannot be affected by anything, by gravity, by speed, nothing. So they were assuming that the clocks on board the satellites were running at exactly the same rate as the clock in your unit. So when they were setting up the system, it was giving locations, wrong distances. So they realized that they had to use Einstein's theory, which said that the clocks in your car are actually running a little slower than the clocks on board the satellites. Computers are used to take that into account. And when they did that, the system was working perfectly. So every time you use your GPS, you should give a silent nod to Einstein, because without his theory of gravity, we wouldn't have a working system. So we do know that time is affected by gravity. That's practical, and that's a basic fact. It turns out that not only can you slow time down, but with Einstein's theory, if you have rotating matter, you can actually twist time into a loop. What do I mean by that? For example, remember I said there were stars that are called collapsing stars that are called black holes, okay? As what it is, any star that begins to collapse, okay, the gravitational field around that star gets greater and greater and greater. And that's why eventually when the star collapses to a certain point, all the light that tries to get away from the star gets pulled back to the surface of the star. And so there's a certain point in which you no longer see the star. What also happens is that time slows down too. Remember, we said that time, we see that effect here on the Earth, but for a black hole, it becomes even more dramatic. If you were watching a person that was traveling close to a black hole, you would see their clock slowing down more and more and more the closer they get to the black hole. Okay. I should mention that there's a science fiction movie that gets that right as well. Okay. It's Interstellar. Interstellar is a beautiful movie, by the way, on a number of different levels. But there was a scene in which the astronauts land on a planet that's close to a black hole. And time for them begins to run slow because they're near the black hole. However, their partner that's on the mothership is far from the black hole, and time is running at a normal rate. Eventually, when they go back to the mothership, they find that they are actually younger than their companion because his clock has been running at a normal rate, whereas theirs has been slowed down, so they have been aging less. That's a real effect. Now, if the black hole is rotating out, in addition to slowing time down, it can actually twist time. What do I mean by that? Imagine that I have a strip of paper here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a timeline. At the bottom of this line, I'm going to put yesterday. At the middle of the line, I'm going to put the present. And at the top of the line, I'm going to put the future. Now, throughout our entire life, even though that we're not aware of it, we're moving along a timeline. And that's how things are described in relativity in terms of time. So all of us are being carried along this time. And notice this timeline is embedded in space, okay? So we're moving along time, okay? Now, what's happening is that in Einstein's theory, it's called spacetime. Space and time are intimately linked to each other. You can't really separate them. Okay, time is the fourth dimension. The other three are the dimensions of space: length, breadth, and height. So what happens is a rotating black hole. A black hole will cause a slowing down of time. Okay, but if it's rotating, a black hole will actually start twisting space, and if space becomes twisted strongly enough, here's what's going to happen.
So you've made a loop with that paper now.
Exactly. So what we will do is travel from the past to the present to the future. But look what happens if I twist time into a loop. I can go from the future to where?
Back to the past. So you're saying
Exactly.
this twist creates this endless loop of cycling through the same stretch of time.
Right, exactly. So a rotating black hole can actually cause time to become twisted in a loop. And along that loop in time, we could actually travel back into the past. Okay. So that's why Einstein's general theory of relativity allows for the possibility of time travel into the past. So to summarize, Einstein's special theory of relativity says time slows down for a moving clock, and that allows us to travel to the future. Einstein's general theory of relativity says that time is affected by gravity. And under certain circumstances, if you have a rotating gravitational field, you can actually twist time into loops. And in fact, when physicists are writing their papers, they sometimes don't describe it as time travel, but they talk about what they call closed loops in time. These closed loops in time is what they're talking about. And under certain circumstances, those can be created. And so that is another possibility. I should mention that's where my work comes in, because I specialized in Einstein's general theory of relativity, how gravity affects time. Okay. And as I said, that was sort of my cover story. And what I wanted to know is, are there other ways that one might be able to do this rather than using a rotating black hole? And that's where the science of photonics actually began to come in, because what Einstein's theory shows is that in Newton's theory, the only thing that can create gravity is matter. The mass of the Earth creates a gravitational field that keeps us anchored to the Earth. The mass of the sun creates a gravitational field, okay, that keeps us in orbit. But it turns out that in Einstein's theory, not only can matter create gravity, but light itself can create gravity. As strange as that may seem, light doesn't have mass. Light has energy, but not mass. It turns out that that's important for my breakthrough, because what I realized, I'm simplifying things, but what I realized is that gravity can affect time, and light can create gravity. Then light can affect time. And what I realized is that there's a way of sort of mimicking a rotating black hole with a device that actually does this. It's called a ring laser. What a ring laser is just simply a device that causes light to move in a loop.
You know, we're just ahead of Laser Munich too, which is a huge laser trade show, and I'm sure we're going to see them for welding, for manufacturing, but I don't know that we're going to see lasers for time travel. So tell me now what we're looking at and how these ring lasers can impact time.
Okay, well, so you have a light beam that's coming in here. Okay, it's bouncing off this mirror, hitting this mirror. It's hitting this mirror, going this mirror, hitting this mirror, and coming back here. So this is what I mean when I talk about a circulating beam of light. It's just getting light to move in a circulating path. It could be a square, any closed loop path, okay? And there's actually photonic crystals that can create this kind of, path. Now, what happens is that, and this comes back to Einstein's theory again. In Einstein's theory, I'm going to have to back up a little bit. Okay, because what I've been talking about is gravity as though it were a force. Einstein, you might say, well, why did Einstein develop this second theory in the first place? He wasn't interested in time travel, but he was interested in a problem that was happening with gravity. Okay, we'll come back to this, but the reason why he realized he had to develop the second theory is that he realized that light is a limit. It's the ultimate speed limit. Now, when I say that, people sometimes say, well, the speed of light had a barrier and we overcame that. So maybe we can overcome this. No, this is a whole different thing. The speed of light barrier is actually built into the physics of the universe itself. And why do I say that? The famous equation that every child is familiar with, equals mc squared. That equation says that a little bit of mass can create a lot of energy. But you'll notice that the thing that's in that equation is the speed of light itself. In other words, E equals mc squared. That's important because what it says is that a little bit of matter can create a lot of energy, but the conversion factor that's in it is the speed of light. This equation we know works. It gives us atomic energy and all sorts of other things. But if it weren't for the fact that light is the ultimate speed, this equation wouldn't work. So the equation works because of that barrier, is my point, okay? So the thing is that what Einstein said is that nothing can exceed the speed of light. But gravity, in Newton's theory, can exceed the speed of light. And what was that? Why is that a problem? Well, think of the following hypothetical situation. Suppose that we look at the Earth orbiting the sun. Let's suppose there was a cosmic catastrophe that destroyed the sun. What would we see? And I mean that in a very direct way. What would we see? Well, the thing is you know that the sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth, okay? And you know the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. It takes 8 minutes for lights to get from the sun to the Earth, okay? What that means is that if the Earth was somehow destroyed in a cosmic catastrophe, it would take 8 minutes before we would see the sun disappear. However, according to Newton's theory, gravity would shut down immediately. Now, think of how weird this would be. Since gravity shuts down immediately, that means that there's nothing to hold the Earth in orbit at once. So we would still see the sun sitting out in the sky for 8 minutes, but we would be hurtling off into space. In other words, we wouldn't even know why it's happening. We would actually still see the sun in the sky, but the Earth would be flying off into space. What that implies is that gravity travels faster than the speed of light. So Einstein said that can't be. So he had to develop a whole new theory of gravity in order to overcome that. And how did he do that? He said gravity, which we think of as a force, really isn't a force. It's a property of space. And what did he mean by that? He said, well, let's suppose that I'll give this as an analogy, but suppose I had a small trampoline, just say a rubber sheet. And suppose I put a bowling ball on that rubber sheet. What's going to happen? That rubber sheet is going to get bent, okay? Now, suppose I take a marble and I set it on the rubber sheet. What's going to happen? The marble is going to move down the rubber sheet and hit the bowling ball. Now, suppose that the bowling ball is still there and the rubber sheet is still there, but suppose the rubber sheet is transparent. What will we now see? Well, if I put the marble on there, the marble will move towards the bowling ball. But remember, the rubber sheet is transparent. So somehow we'll say, oh, the bowling ball is obviously pulling on the marble. But we know that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is that the bowling ball is bending the rubber sheet and the Earth is just moving along that, okay? Einstein said that's what, in fact, is happening in space. The sun is bending the space around it. The Earth is just moving in that. In fact, if I take that marble, let's go back to the bowling. If I take the marble and give it a little bit of a sideways motion, I can actually get that marble to orbit the bowling ball due to the curving of the rubber sheet. The thing is that Einstein said that's what the Earth is. The Earth is just simply moving along that curved space. And fortunately, when the solar system was created, it had a little bit of a sideways motion, so that the Earth is just orbiting around the sun. So gravity is actually just the bending of space by a massive object. Even here at the surface of the Earth, what's happening is that when we jump up, the Earth is actually curving space around us, and we just move back into that curve that's created by the Earth. So any massive body is causing space to bend. So once again, what we call gravity is the bending of space by a massive object. Okay. Now, not only can I bend space, but I could actually warp space so that if I have a rotating mass, not only will the mass bend space, but the rotating mass will actually twist space. You can imagine that if thinking of space as being like a fluid in a way, you could actually rotate space by rotating a massive object. Now, this is where my work comes in, because what I realize is that the circulating beam of light, okay, will actually cause a twisting of space around it. So coming back to this, what's happening here is that this circulating beam of light is going to cause this empty space to become twisted around. Now you might say, well, how do I know it's being twisted? Because empty space, I can't see it. Well, let's say I take a subatomic particle. A neutron, subatomic particle, can actually spin like a little top. So it has an axis of spin. And suppose I put a neutron into that empty space. What's going to happen is that as the space is being twisted, the neutron in here, its spin is going to get twisted. So even though we can't see the empty space, we'll be able to see the neutron start jiggling around. Okay. An analogy of that would be, let's suppose you had a cup of coffee in front of you. Think of that coffee as being like empty space, and think of your spoon as being like the circulating light beam. Okay. You know what's going to happen if you take your spoon? You're going to swirl the coffee around. Now, so imagine that you take a coffee bean and put the coffee bean in there. Then what happens is that as you use the spoon to stir the coffee is going to drag the coffee bean around. Okay. So you can see the effect of the spoon, you might say, by looking at how the coffee is dragging the coffee bean around. Well, that's the same thing that's happening here. We can see the effect of space being twisted by when you turn on the ring laser. Space is being twisted. We can't see the space being twisted, but the space is going to drag around the neutron. Now, you might say and the thing is that there's actually a simple equation. Now, what I should mention, I'm a theoretical physicist, by the way. In physics, there's a precise division of labor between experimental physics and theoretical physics. Einstein was the theoretical physicist. Okay, what theoretical physicists do is they use equations to figure out how the universe works. Experimental physicists build the equipment to actually see how the universe works. What I did was to solve Einstein's gravitational field equations. He had a very complicated set of equations that he developed about how masses affect space. And I solved that equation for the circulating beam of light. What I was able to do was to come up with a very simple equation. This omega here, this omega refers to the spin of this particle. Okay? It's that simple. G in here stands for the universal constant of gravity. Okay? Rho in here stands for the intensity of the laser light. So rho just simply means the intensity of the laser light. Okay. Your photonic people will know what I'm talking about here. A in here just stands for the size of this square of the ring. Mm-hmm. So A is just the dimensions. So A is just the dimensions of the size of the square. C is speed of light cubed. Okay. So what this tells me is that I can increase the spin in here by increasing the intensity of the laser beam, which makes sense. But I can also increase this by making this square smaller. Okay. So the smaller I make the square, the more intense the effect will become. So this is the equation. As I said, it's a very real and precise equation. The thing is that one of the other things I like about this is my own work is the fact that this equation I've written a book, by the way, called Time Traveler, which describes everything that I've described to you. It's a popular level book. It's not a technical book, but what was felt is that the equation, since it's so simple, it should be put in the book. The book has been translated into a number of languages: Chinese, Korean, Japanese. The thing that I like is that even though I can't read these other equations, this equation looks exactly the same in any language. That's the universality of this. In other words, it can be attested by any scientist anywhere. It's not just, something that can only be done here. But the thing is that you might say, has the experiment been done? The difference is that for me, solving that equation just required a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of coffee. But to do the experiment actually requires equipment, and that has not been done yet. I actually have an experimental partner. His name is Chandraroy Chowdhury, who is actually known in the photonics community himself, but The funding is what hasn't happened as far as doing this. People don't realize how expensive these things are. Um, Remember, I was talking about the Large Hadron Collider? The Large Hadron Collider is a great example. All it does is smashes subatomic particles together. Now, you might say, how expensive is that? Right? $10 billion, right? So we're talking about this doesn't require that kind of outlay. It will be millions of dollars, but still, we haven't gotten the funding to actually do the experiment. But it's real. It's based on real physics. And as I said, it just hasn't been done experimentally yet.
Today's episode is brought to you by LightPath Technologies. From concept through prototyping, volume production, and global distribution, LightPath has the optical and infrared imaging knowledge and manufacturing expertise to be your optics and thermal imaging solutions partner every step of the way. Visit lightpath.com to learn more.
Let's say I am the CEO of Photon Joe's Lasers. I read the book. I'm listening to the podcast, and I say I want to get on the ground floor. I have all the lasers. I have the tech. I have the will to invest. What are the specs of the lasers that you need from me to reach those levels to actually test and work this time machine?
Yeah, well, there's two different levels in that, okay? What we're talking about is the twisting of space. And remember, there's energy that's needed for that. The energy that's needed for that is within our technical capabilities. In order to get the energy up enough so that the twisting of space leads to a twisting of time. Remember, I talked about rotating black holes? The rotation of the Earth itself is causing the twisting of space. In fact, there's an experiment that's already shown that. It's Gravity Probe B is the name of the experiment. Okay, but now that twisting of space by the rotating Earth is not as great as a rotating black hole. So you have to have a great rotation in order to have the twisting of space occur. So you might say there's a threshold. You start rotating it, and the rotating Earth is happening. Then, if the rotation is great enough, then it leads to the twisting of time. It's the same here. In math, you have what's known as necessary and sufficient conditions. The necessary condition is showing that space is being twisted by the circulating beam of light. The energies that are required that are not really all that great. And in fact, but you might say you can't just simply say how much, because there's two different parameters here. Remember, there's not just the intensity, but there's the size of the ring. So you have to say, well, I'm going to put in this much energy, but if I want to see a certain twisting here, I'm going to have to use a certain size of this. So it's a dynamical thing. In other words, you're going to have to use two parameters, not just simply the intensity, but also the size of the ring laser. So it's not just simply one. I can give you one number. You could, if you say, well, I want to see this much spin, and I'm going to give you this much intensity, then I can tell you what size of the ring you have to have. But now you might say, well, then where's the threshold going to? But before we get to that, just this portion of it is brand new prediction of physics. And this is important from a practical standpoint, because if you can manipulate space, if you can warp space by using light, there are a lot of practical things that you could do with that. What are the practical things? We talk about transporting information from one place to another, propulsion that people want. What this could do is this could actually show how you could warp space with light as a means of transferring information. Okay, that in itself has practical applications that haven't been done before, but they depend on the experiment being done. So the warping of space is the thing that my collaborator is interested in, the twisting of space portion of this, because, as I said, that hasn't been done yet. If you put in enough energy, then you can get a twisting of time. It turns out that the energies that you need for the twisting of space to get to the twisting of time happen to be galactic, okay? So whereas the energies to cause the twisting of space are within our capabilities right now, the energies that are necessary to keep twisting this so that you get the time twisting are unbelievable. Okay. And my personal feeling is that we're going to have to go into the domain of quantum physics for that, because the energies are just, from a practical standpoint, the twists to time are just too great. Now, why do I say quantum mechanics? Remember the equation equals mc squared? When Einstein first developed that equations, the engineers pointed out to him, is that going to be really practical? Because it isn't from a practical standpoint. It wasn't until quantum mechanics was put into this. And what do I mean by that? When he developed this equation, it was in 1905. We didn't see the practical results of this until the 30s with atomic energy. It wasn't until we made use of quantum mechanics, which comes in with fusion, okay, nuclear fusion. And that is where you might say that overcame the energy barriers that one had for that. It's the same thing here. I believe that quantum mechanics is going to have to be playing a role in order to get that point. But that's research we haven't done yet, building in quantum mechanics into this. But so to answer your question, it's modest energies to try to build to do this. So if someone said, let's do this, they would be doing new physics, showing the necessary condition. But then to go beyond that to show, well, now that we've shown space can be twisted, what are we going to need to twist time? That's going to be a whole different additional experiment. So there's two things that are going on here. And for me, as I said, I think it's just as important to see the twisting of space with laser beams. Now, I should mention that lasers are important for this. The whole effect is due to the fact that I'm using a laser beam. It just doesn't happen for any kind of light. Prior to laser technology, this wouldn't even be a possibility. So photonics is a key factor in all of this.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up, the limitation and paradoxes, but this need for a celestial power, I guess, is your biggest limitation right now from taking this to something more tangible.
Right, exactly. So I said, there's two things. The twisting of space, yes, that's within our technological capabilities, and that needs to be done in order to go to even thinking about the second stage. But if there's any CEOs of photonic companies that want to talk with me about it, they can contact me. I'd be happy to talk with them. But as far as getting, now you can move into still, once we figure out how to twist time as well, okay, or you might say the energies that are necessary to overcome that. If you travel back into the past, you're beginning to talk about the paradoxes that come up as far as time travel. And the most famous paradox is what's called the grandfather paradox. And that is that suppose you go back into the past and prevent your grandparents from meeting each other, then your grandparents don't have your parents. If your parents don't exist, then they can't have you. And if you don't exist, how did you go back into the past to prevent your grandparents from meeting each other? And of course, a cinematic example of that is in a very popular movie, one of my favorites, Back to the Future, which Marty McFly, his mother becomes interested in him rather than his father. And
he's fading from the photo, fading from the Polaroid.
Exactly. So the question is that how do we overcome that paradox if it does occur? Well, thing is that once again, you have to bring in quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics plays a huge role that we haven't begun to get into. And why do I mean by that? Well, it turns out that there was a physicist. His name was Hugh Everett III. He was a theoretical physicist in the 50s at Princeton University. And what he was doing was looking at quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a very, very strange thing. The two pillars of physics are relativity and quantum physics. And if you think relativity is strange, you ain't seen nothing yet until you looked at quantum physics, okay? And what it says is that you can't make predictions of exactly what's going to happen next. All you can do is talk about the probability of events. And what Everett did was to apply this to the universe as a whole. And what he found was the following. He found that any decision, suppose today that at dinner you were looking at the menu and you saw item A and item B. Suppose you decided that you wanted to have item B on the menu. At that instant, there would be a split of the universe. You would have chosen item B, but there would be a real Joe who have chosen item A. Okay, they're real. They don't know about each other, but they're real. That is called parallel universe. Originally, it was called the many worlds interpretation, is what it was originally called. Okay, and what that says is that for every single decision that every single one of us makes, there's going to be a split of the universe, and this is all happening in a sort of a super space, by the way. Okay, and I always like to think that it leads to an interesting philosophy of life, because it says that whatever it is that I do, I know in some universe I got it right. Okay. So,
it's reassuring.
It's right. Exactly. But the thing is that how does this work for time travel? Well, it turns out that this was applied to traveling back into time. Okay. And this, what it implies is that suppose you travel back into the past. Okay. When you arrive in the past, there's a split of the universe. When you arrive in the past, you arrive in a parallel universe. In that universe, you can prevent your grandparents from meeting each other. Okay. Why? Because you didn't come from that universe. So your grandparents don't meet your parents don't have you, and you just find yourself in a strange universe that you were never born in. Okay. However, remember I said there was a split of the universe. The other branch you don't arrive in. In that other branch, your grandparents meet each other, have your parents, and have you. The upshot of this is that when you travel back to the past you arrive in is not the past that you came from. Okay. And that actually is a resolution of the grandfather paradox. But as I said, it requires quantum mechanics in order to do that. Now, you might say, is this the way the universe really works? We don't know, because we haven't traveled back to the past yet. So that's still an open question, but that is an alternative. There's actually a third possibility, which some people have speculated, Stephen Hawking, one of them. He calls it the chronology protection hypothesis. And what that says is that when you try to go back into the past, something is going to prevent you from going. Your device won't work, it breaks down, or something that happens. But once again, we don't really know what's going to happen until we do the experiment. But once again, Einstein's general theory of relativity does show us the way, but we haven't done that yet.
I hate to make this almost sound childish or infantile in a way, but it's amazing to me how these paradoxes align with Back to the Future and Avengers, where in the new one, they talk about it's not Back to the Future. When you go back, you create a whole new timeline and it's a whole new situation. So you can't erase yourself. And they must have some decent physicists working on these films that they actually got some of the science to this correct in a way.
Yeah, well, in a way they do, but it's the human imagination. Remember, the thing that inspired me to become interested in time travel was H.G. Wells's book. H.G. Wells didn't describe how it was being done. He just simply showed that it was. And the interesting thing is that his science fiction came out 10 years before Einstein's theory. He actually mentions time as the fourth dimension before it was mentioned mathematically. And that was in 1895 when Einstein came out with his theory. It was in 2000. And that was 1895 was for H.G. Wells. Einstein came out with his theory in 1905, okay, which is 10 years later. And so the human imagination is one of those things. In fact, one of my favorite quotes by Einstein is that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. What he meant by that was that we need knowledge, but it's imagination that stimulates us to acquire knowledge. Okay. And so it's like what happened even with space. Jules Verne inspired a lot of kids who eventually became rocket scientists. So it's our imagination that stimulates. So for me, it's not so strange that sometimes our imagination is similar to what we actually find factually.
And there's going to be researchers and scientists who maybe lack the imagination and say, this isn't possible. We're just spinning our wheels to even talk about this. But from H.G. Wells to new Hollywood films, there's still this fascination with time travel. Why do you think that seems to be, for lack of a better word, timeless?
Think about it. Who of us has not thought about something in our past that we wish we could change, that we wish we could alter? I get letters almost daily from people saying things that sometimes break my heart. My daughter has died. In fact, one of them was literally brought tears that I got many years ago, was from Germany. It was a letter with some pictures associated with it. I took German, but I wasn't fluent in it, so I had one of my grad students translate the letter. But the thing is that from the pictures, I could tell already what this father was asking me. One of the pictures had this middle-aged couple and this young woman in it. The second picture had the young woman herself. The third picture had this car in a very mangled state. And then the third picture had a picture of her in her coffin. Okay. What this was the middle-aged couple. It was the father who had written this letter. And what he had said was that his daughter had died in a car accident. And is there a way of sending information back to the past so that he could warn her not to go out that evening? Okay. And as I said, that was heartbreaking. And I had to tell him the reality that whereas theoretically time travel is possible, we can't do it practically. So just one example. I've actually had other examples of a mother who contacted me that her son had seen my documentary, and he was wondering if it was possible to send information back to him. And in her case, he was in for murder, and he wanted to send information back to himself to tell himself not to do what he had done that particular time. So that is a reason why time travel is endlessly fascinating, because we would like at some point to go back. I know in my life, of course, it was my father. So that is one of the reasons why people have been endlessly interested in that. Okay. And it's going to happen. I mean, movies that happen all the time. I mean, people are interested in that. Interstellar is just one of the most recent examples, and there's endless possibility. And then just interested in what's going to happen next. What is tomorrow going to be like? Okay, and things like and I overlap with the practical. What if we could have sent information back to ourselves? Imagine if having the solution for COVID, we had been able to send information back to ourselves, the thousands and thousands of lives that we could have saved by sending back that information prior to that, to being ready for it. Okay, the information about tsunamis, hurricanes, the lives that we could save. So just the notion that we could manipulate destiny and change our destiny, I think that's one of the core reasons why people are interested in time travel and will always be interested in time travel.
Yeah, certainly with the ability to redo, undo, change situations, anything is possible. And I guess, lastly, if that does get to that point, then the conversation becomes regulation and ethics, right? Where's the line? Everyone wants the winning lotto numbers, everyone wants to strike it rich.
Exactly. Well, the thing is that, with what I was talking about, this twisting of space with light, which is necessary as a baby step to show in the right direction. As I said, that could be done by simple laboratories. To go to the higher energies that are necessary, it's like the Large Hadron Collider. That have a collaboration with other countries. That's going to require major outlays by governments to do that type of, research. So time travel is not going to be something simple that everyone's going to have their own time machine, just like everyone doesn't have their own nuclear reactor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have government regulation. It's going to have to, just like air traffic. We know the wonders of air traffic and what it does for us, but we also know all I have to do is mention 9/11 to tell us the other side of that. With any technology, you're going to have regulation. One of my favorite movies, which doesn't get as much press as it should, maybe it was because of its title, it's called Time Cop. That movie actually shows the nation that it was an organization, it was a time enforcement agency. And the whole plot of that was to make sure that we regulated against people using time travel for just the things you were talking about, the stock exchange and things like that. It's a great movie, by the way, but it actually shows what one might have to, sort of regulations and violations that might happen if we have that.
Yeah, and it's actually a film I did see, and I'm not going to say that Jean-Claude Van Damme does Oscar-worthy performance, but that's also their theory too. Is you eliminate someone in the past and they're gone in the future, because I think that's how the main antagonist gets it. They get the past guy, and then the future guy poofs. So it prescribes to the Back to the Future style time travel, I suppose. Well, Professor Mallett, this has been a fascinating conversation. I thank you so much for giving me the time to discuss time travel in your work and how photonics plays a role in it all. And I wish you the best of luck in your research. And if I head home tonight and there's a younger, older you by my door and says, Joe, we did it, then I'll know it all worked.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to mention that if people are interested, I have written a memoir that, as I said, it's a popular level memoir, but it does talk about, all the things that we've talked about. And I talk about not just my work. We haven't gone into wormholes, cosmic strings, all of these things talk about our possibilities. And I should mention one thing that I'm happy about is the fact that the book is now under consideration for a feature film, a Hollywood feature film. So that's something that I'm very excited about. And the book is actually available from Amazon if people are interested.
Fantastic.
And they can contact me by email if they're interested in finding out more.
That's great. I wish that the best of luck. I look forward to the development on that. Professor Mallett, thank you again so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
With that, we conclude another episode of All Things Photonics. Thank you to our sponsors, to the technical staff behind the scenes, and to continued support from the Photonics Media editorial team. As always, questions, comments, thoughts, and ideas are welcome. Let us know how we're doing via email at allthings@photonics.com. All Things Photonics is available on all major platforms and on our website, photonics.com.